Miss Happiness and Miss Flower, Chapter 2. It was a week later. Every day, Nona took Miss Happiness and Miss Flower out of their wooden box and dusted them and looked at them. "But where is our house?" asked Miss Flower every day, and every day they both wished, "Little Honorable Miss, oh, please, little Honorable Miss, where is our house?" But Nona could not think how to make a Japanese dollhouse. She got a big cardboard box and cut out doors and windows, but that did not seem right, and the cutting hurt her fingers. She tried to arrange an empty drawer with a wooden box for a bed and some rolled-up handkerchiefs for cushions, but it did not look like anything at all. At last she came to Tom's work table and stood at his elbow. He had finished cutting the pieces for the hull of his galleon. The hull is the bottom part of a boat, and now was very busy gluing them together. He knew Nona would not talk as Belinda did, and so he did not tell her to go away. She stood quite silently, watching his clever, careful fingers, and a feeling stirred in her own as if they could be clever and careful too. At last the hull sat up firm and neat between its blocks on the work table, though the glue was still sticky. Then Nona did speak. "How did you know how to make it?" she asked very respectfully. "Learnt," said Tom, rubbing the glue off his thumb with a wet rag. "How did you learn?" "How did you learn about the Star Festival?" "Oh," said Nona, "you mean—" And as she said that, Tom flipped over the book that had the plan of the galleon in it. It was a paper book filled with patterns and designs and called 100 Ways to Make a Fret Saw Model. "Don't lose my place," said Tom. "I didn't know you could learn to carpenter out of books." "You can learn anything out of books," said Tom. "A book like this?" Tom nodded. "Oh." She stood by him a moment longer and then said, "Thank you, Tom." Mother was very surprised when Nona appeared in front of her wearing her outdoor things, her coat, red cap, boots, and gloves. "Do you want to go out?" said Mother. "Oh, please," said Nona. She was in such a hurry that the words tumbled out. "I've got my Christmas money. I want to go to the bookshop." "Run along then, dear," said Mother. "Run along?" The excitement faded out of Nona's face. By myself?" she asked. "The bookshop is this side of the street. You won't have to cross the road." "But the street with its lorries and cars and bicycles and all the people," thought Nona, "the big boys and the dogs." She shivered. "If you wait for this afternoon, I'll come with you." "I can't wait," said Nona. As Nona opened the front door, all the noise of the street came in. A lorry rumbled past, and a gang of children on roller skates made a noise like thunder. A big boy whistled. Nona shut the front door and ran upstairs. She had meant to take off her coat and cap and throw herself on the bed in tears again, but then she caught sight of Miss Happiness and Miss Flower. They were standing, one each side of her clock, and "Did I take them out of the box?" thought Nona, staring. She must have done, but she had been so excited when she put on her things to go out that she did not remember. Did I take them out of their box? She did not think she had, but there they were, standing by the clock, their feet together, their arms hanging down. It seemed to Nona they were waiting. "I suppose Japanese people are very brave people," thought Nona. And after a moment, she went downstairs and opened the front door again. Just as she was going out, Mother called back, "Oh, Nona, if you're going to the bookshop, be careful to be very polite to old Mr. Twilfit. He's inclined to be cross." "Cross? He's an absolute old dragon," said Anne. "He once nearly bit my head off," said Tom cheerfully. Nona began to shake. "Oh, Anne, come with me." "Can't, I'm busy." "Tom?" "I'm busy too." Nona turned back to the door. "He once chased me out of the shop," said Belinda. "If I know you, you were touching the books with your dirty hands," said Tom. Nona thought, and then went back upstairs and washed her hands. Even paler than usual, but with her head held high, she went out and shut the door behind her. "She has gone," whispered Miss Flower. "And for us," said Miss Happiness. "Is it to do with the house, do you think?" "I think so. We will wait for her to come back." Tick, tick, tick went the clock as the minutes passed. It might have been two little dolls' hearts beating. Nona's heart was beating too, but once you start being brave, you have to go on, thought Nona. She was shaking when she got to the bookshop. Perhaps she expected to meet a real dragon, but all she could see in the shop were books, stacks and racks of them, books on shelves and laid on tables, books piled up on the counter. The shop had W. Twilfit, bookseller, over the window, but though she peeped and peered, she could see no sign of anyone at all. The bell rang as she went in, which made her jump. Very carefully, she walked between the tables and jumped again when she saw a big old man looking at her. In the dark shop, he seemed very big, very alarming to Nona. His gray hair stood up in a shock, making him seem even taller than he was. But the most frightening thing about him were his eyebrows that were thick and shaggy as two furred gray caterpillars. When she saw him looking at her, Nona stayed as still as a mouse caught in a trap. "What do you want, hey?" His voice was so big it seemed to rumble around the shop. "Please," said Nona, could hardly make any sound at all. "Please, have you got a book called 100 Ways to Make a Japanese House?" "No such book." Besides being a rumble, it was cross. Nona held on to the edge of a table. "But Tom said—" "Tom's wrong." The shameful tears were near again. Nona bent her head over a book and turned over a page. "Don't touch!" shouted Mr. Twilfit. This time Nona jumped so high that she bit her tongue, and the pain and the fright made her speak before she could think. "I can touch," she said. "I washed my hands before I came." She did not know then that when Mr. Twilfit's eyebrows worked up and down in that way that looked so frightening, it meant that he was pleased. They worked up and down now. "Washed them?" said Mr. Twilfit, as if he didn't believe her. For answer, Nona showed them to him, palms upward. Mr. Twilfit bent and looked at them. Then he took one, and he could feel how Nona was trembling. "I didn't know there was a boy or girl in this town," he said, "who would wash their hands before they touched books. I beg your pardon, little missy." The rumble was almost soft now. Aya had called Nona little missy. It was too much for Nona. She burst into tears. "Must it be a Japanese house?" asked Mr. Twilfit. "They are Japanese dolls," said Nona. "And you want to make them feel at home," said Mr. Twilfit, and he looked out of the window. Then he said, "When I was a little boy, I knew what it was like to be a long way from home." Mr. Twilfit had not chased Nona out of his shop. Indeed, he had taken her into his room behind it and sat her down at his desk while she told him all about Miss Happiness and Miss Flower. His eyebrows worked up and down as she told him from the beginning of the postman bringing the parcel right down to 100 Ways to Make a Japanese House. "But I'm afraid I was right," he said. "There is no such book. There are others. Can you read?" he rapped out. "Of course," said Nona. "Really read?" That was one thing Nona was quite sure she could do, and she nodded. Mr. Twilfit got up and went back into the shop. Nona could hear him rummaging and taking down books from the shelves. "This one is called Japanese Homes and Gardens," he said, bringing in a book. It was nearly half as big as Nona. She took a deep breath. "I don't think I could pay for one as big as that," she said. "It's nearly all pictures. Might be useful," said Mr. Twilfit, as if she had not spoken. He went back to the shop. He found another book called Customs of Old Japan, then one on how the Japanese arrange flowers, and a book of Japanese fairy tales with more pictures. "Useful," said Mr. Twilfit. "I don't understand about the money here," said Nona. "Indian money is different." And she put all her Christmas money, a 10-shilling note, some half-crowns, shillings, sixpences, and pennies, on the desk. "But would this be enough?" "Can't buy those books," said Mr. Twilfit. "Out of the question. Costs a lot of money. Will you be careful if I lend them to you?" "Very careful," said Nona, and her brown eyes glowed. "Give me your name and address." "Nona Fell," said Nona dreamily. She was thinking about reading those books. "Nona Fell, Coimbatore Tea Estate, near Travancore, South India." "You are in England," said Mr. Twilfit very gently. "Your address here." Nona looked at him, and the glow went out of her eyes. She could have fallen through the floor with shame. Even small children, almost babies, know their address. But she had been taken into the house almost as if she had been a piece of luggage, and had never bothered to notice or find out its address. "I don't know," she had to whisper. "I see. You weren't interested," said Mr. Twilfit, and Nona nodded with another rush of tears. "Is it far?" asked Mr. Twilfit. "Just down the road." "Come along, then," said Mr. Twilfit. "Good gracious heavens!" said Belinda, who was looking out one of the front windows. "Look at Nona and Mr. Twilfit." Everyone crowded to the window to see. "He has a great bundle of books," said Anne. "She's bringing him in," said Belinda. "Well, I'll be darned," said Tom. It was Mother who really brought him in, for it was she who opened the door. "Nona, I was getting anxious," then she broke off. "I see you have found a friend." "Have I?" asked Nona. She had not thought of having a friend in England, but it seemed like that when Mr. Twilfit came in and sat down and had a cup of coffee. "And we were fetched down to the room to meet the old and honorable gentleman," said Miss Happiness. She made us a bow, said Miss Flower, and she sounded just as pleased as Miss Happiness. She is beginning to understand. Now, every day on the playroom window seat, 3 heads could be seen. Nona's dark one, bent as she sat cross-legged with one of Mr. Twilfit's books, and beside her 2 very small black ones, Miss Happiness and Miss Flower. She had made them cushions from pieces of old hair ribbon. Miss Happiness had a red cushion. Miss Flower's was pale blue. I like mine best, said Miss Flower. Then she was worried in case Miss Happiness did not like her own. But I like mine, said Miss Happiness. Nona had no time to stand and look out the window. She spent all day over Mr. Twilfit's books or trotting up the road to see Mr. Twilfit. She was learning all she could about Japan, about Japanese houses and gardens and Japanese furniture, though it mostly isn't furniture, thought Nona, about quilts and cushions, bowls and scrolls, about the niche to hold the scroll and flowers, about the way the Japanese arrange flowers. She was learning about Japanese feasts. And they do have a star festival, said Nona. A New Year's festival and a feast of dolls. But not with dolls like us, said Miss Flower, and she and Miss Happiness said together, honorable dolls. Nona learned Japanese names and about Japanese food and Japanese fairy tales. She was not the only one to learn. Everyone else has to learn too, said Anne, willy-nilly, for Nona sometimes read the books aloud in her sing-song voice. Like a reading machine, said Tom. For goodness sake, said Belinda, and stuffed her fingers in her ears. Though Belinda stuffed her fingers in her ears, there was one story she always managed to hear. It was in the fairy tale book, and it was about a boy called Peach. We had a little Peach who should have been in the parcel, but was lost, and Mother still hasn't written to Great Aunt Lucy Dickinson, said Belinda. The Peach Boy's story began with a man and a woman who longed for a child. No child came until one hot summer day the woman found a big peach floating in the stream. She took it home for her husband to eat. But no sooner had he touched it with his knife than the top flew off. It opened in 2 halves, and there, in the peach, was a tiny baby boy. A Japanese baby boy, said Miss Happiness and Miss Flower. Belinda loved that story. He grew up to be a naughty, just like me, she said. And when he was big, he went out into the world. I wonder why our little Peach didn't come, said Belinda.